Okay, continuing with some more tools to help you build models. This tool came about not too long ago, and it's called the Rounder Tool. And let me show you what it does just by, I want to start with a basic box first. Reset, activate, and you've already done this, but it's worth repeating just a moment here. But if I zoom in here, okay, you start with a box with really sharp edges, okay? But in the real world, it rarely exists that there are absolutely precise sharp edges. That you generally have little, they're called fillets. It sort of looks like fillets, but it's not. They're fillets, little rounded edges or corners where it's it's not perfect. And what we've had or used in the past, we used with Reboot, we could go ahead and we can change the radius here. And notice what it does is that it cuts it off sharply by default. So you see these sharp edges. So I'm just using the spinner here, and you can control it by also typing in a specific size. The other thing that you can do, if you want it, instead of making it look like a chiseled edge, then you change the radius segments. And by adding a handful of segments, notice how it rounds it off. Okay? That's one way to do this. But it uniformly adds fillets to the whole object. Well, what if you wanted to round off only part of it? Okay, then that's what I'm going to show you next, which is the Rounder Tool. So everybody understands this? Very useful, very easy, very useful. If you know you're going to add fillets to an object like this, it's better to start off doing it rather than doing it later, if at all possible. But if you have to limit what you're doing, then that's okay too. Meaning limit it in the sense that you discover later on that you need to add fillets. Sometimes it's a little bit harder, but generally you can work it through. This works pretty nicely though if you can do it from the get-go. Another way of doing this, let's go ahead and select the disk tool, for example. And I'm going to go ahead and reset, and I'm going to activate. And this would be another similar feature here. So I want this facing up like so. I'm going to move it up like so, so it's sitting up above the grid. So you can see what's going on here. I'll leave the default settings here, and that's just fine. Now, for example, what if you were creating, and I've noticed in some situations what you're doing, for your toy, for a bottle or something, that you want this top edge here to be rounded. You want it to be flat at the bottom, but you just want the top to be rounded. So what we can do is there's a variety of ways that we can approach this, but I'm going to start by selecting polygons and just select the top polygon, and that's it. And now we can switch to multiply. And what I want to do right here under extend, we have the Rounder Tool. And the Rounder Tool really is the same principle as the bevel tool, but it's a little bit more controlled. So by clicking that now, we can select points or edges, and I will do points in a minute, but I'm going to use the default setting of edges. And if I come up here under action and I say activate, depending on what settings you have, this can really discombobulate, totally ruin your entire object because the settings are so extreme, it really throws things and makes them really wonky, for lack of a better term. Okay? But you can see how it just rounds off that edge. Pretty cool. Now we can come back. You can determine how many polygons, and it's set to 5. If you want it smoother, you can increase it or decrease it, and again, see what you're getting here. You can also determine the inset distance, so we can decrease that so it's a tighter or broader curve. Okay, that's what that does. Pretty cool, huh? And we can come back here and deselect now you have a curved surface along the top. Now, here are some other things that we can do with this, which are pretty cool. So I'm going to select another one. I'm going to go back to the cube again. So let's go back and create a new cube or a box, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to reset and activate, so it's just a plain box. Now what I can do, again, is I can select no polygons, or I can select just one polygon. And we're going to switch again to the Multiply tab, and we're going to select the Rounder tool. But this time, I'm going to instead select points. So what I should have done, instead of selecting the polygon, is let's deselect it. I didn't want to do that. I want to do that, but that's what it's doing. You see it's only affecting the one side. There, we got it. Okay, you got that. So instead, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select these points, corner points. Now, Sarah, you did this last semester, right? For the dice that you created, or the die? So what if you just want the corners to be rounded and not the edges? So now what we'll do is we'll switch again, and we'll select Rounder, and we're going to select points instead. And let's go ahead and let's select Activate. You can see how it rounds those out. Whoops, I didn't want to do that. Let me do that again. Action, Activate. There we go. Got to turn off the Rounder tool first. See how it rounds it off? You know, it would be very difficult to do this otherwise. In the past, you would probably have to use Boolean modeling to overlap something and then cut it away, and then you get it becomes really awkward, and you have to it doesn't work as smoothly or easily or as efficiently as this tool. Very nice. Okay. So some other things that we can do with this. Now, this is, didn't want to do that, but that's okay. Let's go ahead and turn that off. I don't want edge bevel. I want to turn off the points. Let's say, for example, let's go ahead and select the polygon. Not only can you create rounded outside, but you can create coves inside. And that can be done a variety of ways too. So for example, if I could select this one polygon, select B for bevel, and then click, I've added the geometry, right? Everybody remembers how to do that. Switch from mode, make sure it's center of selection, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to hit Shift H for size and bring this in a little bit, okay? And now I want to create the interior of a box. So what I'm going to do now is hit bevel again, hit B for bevel, click, then hit T for move, and then I can go ahead from maybe the front or side view and then pull this down like so. So I've created an interior of my box. Well, what if, let me move this back up a little bit so we can see this a little bit better. You can see the edge here, okay? Turn off T for move, and then deselect the polygon. Now, what we can do is, if I want inside here, I want to create, instead of a really sharp edge, I want it to be curved or coved in here. So what I can do is I can select these polygons, make sure that polygons are selected. Actually, I'm going to select the bottom one. And I'm going to give this one a whirl and see what we can do. Because at the moment, I'm sure, at this point in time, I don't know that I'm going to get exactly the look I'm going for, so I might have to experiment. I'm going to go back to edges with this bottom one selected. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select Activate and see what it does. And notice it made it way, way too round. So, but that's 149 millimeters. So I'm going to go ahead and reduce this. Notice how it's reducing it. And notice how it's coved at the bottom here, just by selecting that one polygon. So you can select edges, you can select polygons, and curve just individual areas, like I'm doing here. Let's turn that off and deselect it. Notice how it's rounded and coved down there. Very, very nice. Okay, and you'll notice it works very smoothly. It's not without its problems, without its glitches, but it does work nicely, and it works best if you start with some simple geometry like this and then add the fillets. Another thing that we can do too, along the same lines, I said you can really select what you want curved and what you don't want curved, is that, for example, if I start again with a box, and let's say I'm going to make something equivalent to a chair. So I'm going to go ahead and reset and activate. And I'm done with a box. And now I'm going to hit Shift K, and I want to go ahead and I'm going to create some add additional geometry here. Okay, see how I did that? And then I'm going to go ahead and texture wire so I can see where I have my additional geometry that's been added. Now I'm going to select this polygon, and I want to stretch this. So I'm making a really crude looking chair. Does that make sense? So what I can do now is hit B for bevel and click, and then hit T for move, and then let's move this up like so. Okay. Now in version 9 it works a little easier because we can select edges, and we can't select edges in version 8. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select 2 points, and I'm going to try it that way. I'm going to turn off T for move. I'm going to deselect the polygon, and I'm going to go ahead and select from, instead of polygons, I'm going to select points, and I want this point, and I want this point, but I don't want corners selected. I still want edges selected. So we'll go back to multiply. Select the Rounder tool. I have edges selected. Let's go ahead and activate. And notice how it curves just that between it. If I want to increase this a little bit, notice how it's curving it and make it nice and round between that. Now, before this, Rounder tool, probably what you would have to do in order to create this, like you see here, is we would have to use the Extrude tool to do this. Think about it. What if you were to create in profile the side of the chair with the little rounded corner, the rounded edge here, and then just extrude it? That would be another way of doing it. But this, I think, makes it a little bit easier for you. What it does do, which I don't like, that maybe Extrude would be better, is look at the geometry it creates here. All these additional polygons along the edge on either side, and that isn't so good. So maybe in some sense, you know, depending on what you're going to do with this, the Extrude would be a better choice, but this is doable. Okay. So that's the Rounder tool. It's similar to Edge Bevel. It's similar to some of the other tools that they used to have, or that they have in here. The Router tool is similar. I find the Router tool to be a little bit awkward compared to the Rounder tool. Okay. Any questions about that tool? Okay. I encourage you to try some of these others. We are going to use the Magic Bevel tool in the next week. We've used Rail Bevel. We've used the Rounder tool, which is like the Router tool. We don't have any motion paths, but you can extrude along a motion path if you want. That would be something you would do in animation when you create your motion paths for something to follow. You can extrude along that. Try the Seashell tool and see what you get, and the same with the Spiky tool. It's just what you might think. The more points you have, the more polygons, it creates this spiky kind of gnarly look. And that's about it. The Seashell tool, you can take a two-dimensional shape, and it's almost like extruding and lathing, and it will create something that looks somewhat like a conch shell, you know, a seashell. So they have limited uses, and they're not terribly, the Seashell tool I found is not easy to control, but it has its purpose. Okay. Some other tools we have that I haven't shown you. we go back here. Anybody tried the metaballs yet? Metaballs. It's down here under polygons. It's a interesting tool, to say the least. It's one that you can use that has for organic modeling, and I've seen some really neat things done with it, and they take some time to do. But this is how it works. You select metaballs, and you click and you drag, or click actually, and you have this little ball here. Okay, now notice, let's look at it in perspectives. You can see what's going on here. Now if I click again and I have another one, notice that when they're next to one another, there isn't that influence, and I can move, as I move them apart and bring them together, notice that there is this influence between them. It's almost like putty, like clay. So they're organic in nature. You can resize them. I can come out here and I can make it bigger, smaller, and then move it together so that you begin to see this sphere of influence. And this can work well for some simple organic models. And let me go ahead and add a third so you can, again, begin to see what's going on here. Let's move this up. Okay. Kind of crude, but I mean, what if you're going to make Mickey Mouse? Yeah? So there, I'm making Mickey Mouse here. I didn't want to do that. Let's undo that. Oh, I didn't want to do that. Let's do it again. Let's make it a little bit bigger. Let's click again. Make it smaller. Click again. Move it over here. Got to make sure you click right on the center, or what I'm experiencing at the moment when I've goofed it up is then it adds another one to it. So as long as you leave them as metaballs, you can continue to click in the center and move them around, and you can resize them. Now, if you're happy with it, then you turn it off. And then you have some other choices in here. If you're absolutely done with it, I mean, you can always copy it to a new layer as a backup. But then what you can do, we can go to, and I got to remember where to go here. Utilities. Hold on here. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm good. I'll just leave it. Modify. What I want to do is fix this, and so what I may have to do, I can't remember where it is now. I want to convert this or freeze it, and then it will turn it into polygons, instead of this feature here. And I'm trying to remember what tab I need to go to here. And I can't remember what tab. Detail. Construct. That's what I want. I want to freeze this right here. It's under construct. Okay, so now it's frozen. And notice it's all 3-point polys. So now I can switch to the tab key, and I can use subpatch to turn it into something organic. But notice how complex it is. So to think you're going to come back and to revise it in any simple way is not all that easy. We can come back, if you see this cage and it's really confusing to you, we can look to display. And what I can do is under, let's see, what says show cages, we can turn that off, and then that will simplify how you view this. And if I turn off textured wired and just look at it textured, you can see it. So now it just looks like a big lump of something. Okay. But if you had a silhouette, think of it this way. The one example I saw, and this was many years ago, before subpatches and meta-NURBs really kind of took hold in popular software, is that these metaballs were used. And what they did is they had drawn a two really good outlines of, it was this dinosaur. And you put the balls in large ones for would be for the chest cavity and that sort of thing. Then use smaller ones for the legs and moved them together. And we're very careful about the placement and the overlap between them, and then froze them. And you had a pretty nice looking dinosaur when you're done. And that was before, using, as I said, meta-NURBs or any kind of organic modeling. That was the closest thing they had to organic modeling, and it looked pretty nice. Okay, so that's another tool that you have. Next thing that I want to show you are displacement maps. This is a map, but it's a nice way of modeling. It's kind of a combination. Displacement maps look like bump maps, but they are not a bump map. I mean, they behave like a bump map to a certain degree, but with bump maps, the surface normal, bump maps affect that, and that's where you get the bumpy surface. It isn't affecting the geometry. With displacement maps, however, it does change the geometry. So in order to get a nice smooth bump or an effective bump, in this case I'm going to show you today, and we'll continue this on Monday, is to show you a nice, if you want to create a terrain, if you want, ripply flag, or you wanted rolling hills or mountains or things like that, how would you do that? This displacement maps, I think, are the easiest way to work. I'm going to clear all of these out and come back to this and reset all of this. And I'm just going to start with a simple box, but it's going to be a two-dimensional, okay? Just like so. So this represents my terrain, okay? I can either subdivide later or I can add segments now. But similar to wanting to use the bend tool, remember we had to add geometry in order to make those joints. Well, the same holds true for this. In order to bend this and to get nice, ripply, bumpy surfaces, you have to add geometry to this. So I'm going to go ahead and add a bunch of segments along the X and Z. And I'm going to add quite a few. How about 24 along the X and along the Z? So like about so, maybe 16. And it depends on how big or how small the object is. So now we have that mesh that we can tweak. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and give it a surface. We'll call it dirt. And I'll make it sort of brown in color. So it sort of looks like dirt. Let's look at this in perspective. And I need to save this. So I'm going to go File. I'm going to Save Object As. And we'll name it Earth or Dirt. Just dirt. Or how about hills? Because that's what I'm going to do ultimately, to make rolling hills out of this. Let's see, I don't want that. I want to go to my desktop, make sure that I save it in my new content folder here under Objects. Okay, Hills, Save. Now, in order to add the displacement map, I need to go into Layout. I can't do it here.
Does it have to be double-sided?
Huh?
Does it have to be double-sided?
Double-sided, you can if you wish. If you're not going to see the bottom side, then no. If you were going to do a flag, something like that, then you bet I would want it double-sided. So let's go ahead now and send object to layout. Let's look at this from camera view. And let's raise our camera up here. Make sure that the camera is selected. And hit T for move. And let's go ahead and move this up so I can see the terrain. And I can move forward a little bit. And let's hit Y to rotate. And I actually need to move this again, so hit T again. Let's move the camera up. I'm trying to get a nice shot of this, and I'll probably want to change it as I go. Now, there's something that I'm going to have to change and add, and I'm purposely leaving it out for a moment, but this still should work. Okay? Now, to add the displacement map, we make sure that we have the object selected, and then you select properties. Okay? So now what we want to do here under deform, and that's basically what we're doing, we can add here enable bump, and we want displacement map. We can use a texture if we want on this. And this would allow us a procedural texture that can enable a bump. But notice it is a bump, but notice here the T is for displacement map. It's not affecting the surface normals. The only way this would work is if you have all the points that I've created in here. It actually displaces points. So if we click here, and I use planar, and I don't want image map, I'm going to use procedural. Let's use that. And notice, see what it's doing? See how it creates a bumpy-like surface? But it's actually moving the points. But the downside to this at the moment, let me switch back to perspective view and zoom in here, is that you see, depending on your view, you don't, you have lots of non-planars. So there isn't a problem with it in that it will render correctly, but part of the problem that exists is that, especially in OpenGL here, it can't view some of those polygons properly. You're also, even with smoothing turned on, if I come back here, let's bring up our surface editor, and I turn on smoothing, we get a better result, but we still get some glitches in here. Now, there is a way of doing this, of fixing it and making it better. And this is true with all forms. This is more organic modeling now. To eliminate those fractures or those glitches, and you would do this with a character as well, as once you have frozen it, once you're done modeling it, then you triple it. Remember, we've done that with other things, that you change the 4-pointed polygons into 3-pointed polygons so you get a smoother mesh. That you remove the possibility of the non-planars. So we can go back to Modeler, and I can hit Shift-T for triple, and now when I go back, we can go ahead and save it, and I switch back to layout. Notice how it fixed all of those automatically. I no longer have any non-planars, and now I have my rolling hills. Now, it depends. It can look like a blanket, depending on the scale. You can also use the displacement maps. Speaking of blankets, is that when you see move, because they can be animated. Yeah. Huh? No, subpatch to actually move it around. Well, let me undo it. Let's go. I already saved it. Shoot. Let me go back to Modeler. Let me see if I can't undo. And now let's go back again. Switch to layout. And hit the tab key. Actually, I need to go back to modeler to do that. Hit the tab key. And it is rounded now. Let's go back to switch to layout. That's what happens. It does work, but it does look a little different. Yes, because you've doubled your polygon count, you're right, it will take longer to render. Give each one a whirl and see what works best for you. As I said, depending on what it is you're building, if it's a blanket that looks like kind of a ripply, crinkly blanket. If it's rolling hills, then what you need to do, based on scale, is that we need to move the camera much closer so you get a different perspective of it, that's all. So if I switch to camera, and I rotate the camera now, let me make sure I have, camera selected here. Oops. Camera, let me make sure I have Y selected, there we go. I'm going to make sure I'm looking at camera view, there we go. Let's hit T for move, and let's come down a little bit. Whoops, wrong key. Let's move closer, 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 closer. Let's hit Y for rotate. So I'm trying to get as close as I can without really, really distorting. Now if I actually get even closer in here, let's see if I can't do that. Let's move over here in this area. So if you were to create sort of a valley or something. Remember, you can use black and white images to do this. It doesn't have to be a procedural map. See how it's starting to look like hills and valleys depending on scale, the scale that you're working on, and where your camera is relative to everything else. When I was farther away, it looked like a wrinkly kind of blanket. You know, you couldn't tell the size of it. But now that we're close up and in the face of this thing, deep into it, this could be easily, a mountain range. It could be hills and valleys, and we could change the color. You can add grass to this. The problem with adding SAS Light to this, though, is that the version that we have, because it is SAS Light, not the full-blown version of it, and I can't remember the number of polygons, that you're restricted to the number of polygons that you can apply it to. So, to answer your question, it probably would be better if you're going to add grass to this, to not triple it so that you have fewer polygons. We should probably give it a try since we're here and we've got a few minutes. Let's see what we can do, because that's pretty much what I wanted to cover today. Let's go to image processing. Let's add pixel filter. We're going to add SAS Light. Let's go to objects, and we're going to go to properties. And we're going to add a displacement map, and we're going to add SAS Light. And I'm going to change the color of it so that it's green. And I'm just going to leave all the settings default. Might actually look like green fur on here. It may not even do it because I may have gone over the polygon count. Let's go ahead and render the thing and see what we get here. Whoa, way too long. So now it kind of I guess now we're in a bug's life or something, so we're really up close and personal with this. But things come to mind when I see this, though, is that for your final project, what if you were doing an insect and you wanted this ladybug or this ant or something, and you wanted to, you thinned this out, kept it long, and you're in there, and it really looked like you were at the scale of the ant and you were in the middle of the grass. It looked pretty cool. That's how you do that. So let me hide this. Let's go back and let's find SAS Light. Clearly too long. So let's cut this back. I'm going to cut it back to maybe 25%. Let's also cut the density back to maybe 25%. I don't want to change any of the other variables because I'm not going to know what's going to go on, what's going on here. Let's go ahead and render frame and just see what we get here. There we go. Now it looks like little bits of weeds and stuff. You know, you don't have a nice rolling hills, but you do get the sense. And we could add a bump map, not only have a displacement map, but we could also add a bump map so that it doesn't look too smooth. It looks like it's crusty and it looks like it's dirt and jaggy. And then have these little bits of grass and weeds growing through here. Now, if I were to increase the density again, it would look like it was grass on these rolling hills. I don't know, maybe it looks like something else. Kind of funky. Mm-hmm. What? In layout or in modeler?
Yeah, in layout.
Okay, let me show you both. And let me show you something here. Let's hide this. So if we look instead of that, you want to just see what?
Yeah, wire.
Wireframe. See how it actually changes the view, the placement. I mean, it literally displaces points. But now watch when you look at in modeler. That's why I said which view, and I said let's look at both. It stays flat.
So where the grid, like 24 by 16 inside, that's it?
Yeah. And again, I could go back and do another one and take it out, but and if you need to on Monday, I will. But what I'm thinking of right now is, again, use as your reference. When we used the bend tool when we were creating Reboot, if you don't, in order to bend it, if you don't have any joints, it restricts how it bends. It looks pretty clunky. The more joints we had, the more geometry, the smoother the bend we could make, the more control we could have over the bend, and the better results we would get by using some of the weight maps or those widgets that would allow us to control how it bends, how it distorts, bloats, deforms, whatever. The same is true with displacement maps. If you use too few polygons, test it. Try to reduce and use fewer polygons, because you may, if you have good results, but with smoothing turned on, then maybe that's all you need to do, and that would be great. Then your rendering time will go quicker. It will be easier to use image processing like SAS-like if you want rolling hills, or if you want to create kind of fuzz on a blanket or fur on a blanket, like it's a furry blanket, who knows. But if you don't get the results, if it looks too chunky, if it's too faceted, then you'll need to use subdivide, and you'll double your polygon count, and then try that. And then Zambarose suggested maybe instead of tripling it, just hit the tab key and use subpatch, so it rounds it off a little bit too, and that helps it. So either one, will work. I do know, though, for character models, though, subpatch won't always get you where you need to be. That when you're actually animating them and you've applied bones and your stuff, it helps if you actually triple it so you don't get crinks in arms. You've seen that in older models that have been animated. You get these weird bends. It's not a smooth bend. It's a real crisp, almost like when you're bending an inflatable toy. It just collapses almost. Another thing that would be worth trying, that I encourage you to try, is I said that like bump maps. Remember how we used an image to create a bump of the window? Well, what they have done with displacement maps as well is you can find grayscale images of terrain where you have your lights and darks that raise and below, and you use them as image maps, and the light areas should rise and the dark areas should recede and the gray areas should stay. flat. And you can actually replicate the terrain of specific areas. You can also create some interesting effects. You may have seen in television commercials where you'll see this truck up on a plateau in Arizona desert, or maybe it's in, or New Mexico, and then the helicopter rises above and it looks down, and you see the word Chevy written out, and the plateau, from the side view just looks like this steep mountain or this steep cliff. And at the top, you actually see the word Chevy written out. Well, that's what they did. They used a displacement map with that word, of the word Chevy, and then as it extruded, you could see it change and morph into the word. So you can do some pretty fun things with that too. Okay, so those are some more tools. The Rounder tool, which is very powerful, can do some really nice things. Added details, subtleties that you need. If you're still working on your toy, you might want to think about that a little bit, so that you get the little fillets, so it doesn't look too computer generated. And in this case, displacement maps, which are really pretty cool. Another way of, it's not a tool to add in so much as like the Boolean tools were, but if you want to know how to create organic mountains, ranges, or ripply blankets or something, then you can do that. And what I forgot to mention is with the ripply blankets, I think I got distracted, but they can be animated. And you may have seen, a character underneath a blanket, and you see them breathing, and it gets bigger and smaller and bigger and smaller. Well, they don't have the model underneath increasing or decreasing in size. They probably just have a displacement map. And then they animate it, and they can move it up and down. I'm going to do more of this on another day to show you, for example, if you have a flag, and over time, if you wanted to make the flag ripple, or similarly, if you had, think of it another way, if you had a pond, and you dropped the pebble in the pond, and you wanted the ripples to move outward, same thing, you could use displacement maps for that. And not only can you do a still, but you can also animate them over time. Okay? Okie doke. Good deal. Okay. So the rest of today, work.